one of the ways, again, one of the things happening is many of these cannabis industry companies, they operate in cash. The IRS doesn't like companies that operate in cash because they can't track it. And they want to be able to track it. If your company does all credit cards, well, that's easy, right? The credit card companies, they report it. And the IRS knows exactly what you got in credit card receipts. But if people come in with cash, how is the IRS going to know what you're getting? The answer is they don't, unless you report it correctly. Now, most people would say that they report it correctly. But the IRS believes that we're all liars and thieves. And so they don't want to give up on that. Let me make sure I have this so we can get to the story. Let's get to the story. I want to start with this story here on this page, the marijuana moment, only because I like the... If I'm going to talk about cannabis, let's talk about the marijuana moment. Also, the picture they have here. Biden Treasury Secretary says, of course, marijuana banking would make IRS's job easier. And that's what this is all about. It's making the IRS's job easier, collecting money, collecting more money. Again, they always say it's about fairness, but it's really not about fairness. It's about collecting money. And that's what they want to do. The Secretary of the U.S. Treasury said on Wednesday that freeing up banks to work with the state legal marijuana businesses would, of course, make the Internal Revenue Service's job of collecting taxes easier. Of course it would. At a hearing before the House Financial Services Committee, he referenced the recent comments from the IRS official about the special type of collection challenges the IRS undertakes regarding tax collection from cannabis-related businesses forced to operate in cash only. Do you agree if these businesses were simply allowed to access the banking system and didn't have to transact business only in cash, it would make the IRS job easier? Yes, of course it would, she replied matter-of-factly. The congressman also talked about his bill, the Secure and Fair Enforcement Banking Act, which has passed the House in some form 5 times now and would resolve the issue by protecting financial institutions that service state legal cannabis businesses. So that's really what they're looking for, right? Banks are risk adverse. They're not sure what the federal government would do or others, and so they don't allow cannabis businesses to do banking. So if you try to use a credit card, for instance, in a cannabis store, you can't get one, a dispensary as we call them today, right? You can't use it generally. You cannot use debit cards or credit cards in a dispensary. Numerous financial, labor, and insurance associations, as well as key lawmakers, are pushing the Senate to attach the measure to must-pass defense spending legislation, as the House already has. Bipartisan members of the Senate, Armed Services Committees, as well as senators representing Colorado, made the same request in recent letters. Well, I'm against that. Okay, we shouldn't. If it can pass, let it pass. If it can't pass, you don't attach it to some bill that must pass. So this is where we get where we are today, where we get all these laws that don't make any sense because they attach it to something that we really need, and then politicians get what they want because of what we really need. I think it should pass on its own merit. My own opinion. I'm against all these bills that are 2,000 pages long or 3,000 pages long or more, because no way that the politicians know what's in the bill, and that's why we have to pass the bill to find out what's in it, as Nancy Pelosi famously said, and I famously said that many times on this program. While Yellen's response was quick, it's yet another example of the federal official recognizes the untenability of the status quo. Manchin, the Treasury Secretary under Trump, repeatedly addressed the issue, saying that current policy conflict creates significant problems for the IRS and financial regulators. It creates significant risk in the communities for collecting this amount of cash. It's problematic. IRS, for its part, said in September that it expects the cannabis market to continue to grow. They're geniuses. And it offered some tips to businesses on staying compliant with taxes while the plant remains federally prohibited. With respect to the Safe Banking Act, the bipartisan coalition of 24 governors recently implored congressional leaders to finally enact marijuana banking reform through the large-scale defense legislation. Again, pass it on its own merit. A group of small business marijuana business owners also recently made the case that incremental banking policy change could actually help support social equity efforts. Well, if all else fails, make the social equity argument. Rodney Hood, a board member of the National Credit Union Administration, wrote in a recent Marijuana Moment op-ed that legalization is an inevitability, and it makes the most sense for government agencies to get ahead of the policy change to resolve banking complications now. Federal data shows that many financial institutions remain hesitant to take on cannabis companies as clients. However, which is likely due to the fact that the plant is strictly controlled substance under federal law. Well, that's true. It is. That's a good story. I wanted to start with that story. Now I want to move on. The New York Post has a similar story. Let's see if we can get to the Post story. Very similar was the headline. The headline is IRS could collect taxes from pot firms if they used big banks, Yellen says. I'm going to tell you this. They are collecting taxes from pot firms, even without the big banks. And I don't know if you know this, but whenever these big marijuana companies pay in taxes in cash, there's a 10% fee for paying in cash. So they have to pay their taxes plus 10%. So I don't know if the IRS really wants that. Now they could say, well, we're losing more than that. They're stealing more than that. I don't know if that's true or not. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said she supports allowing legal cannabis dispensaries to access the U.S. banking system, where they're now largely barred, to make it easier for the government to collect tax revenue. Not because it's the right thing, but because they can collect more tax revenue. Yellen was asked by Colorado congressmen on the Financial Services Committee on Wednesday if she thought allowing pot firms to use the U.S. banks would facilitate tax collection by the IRS. Yes, of course it would, the Treasury Secretary replied. Large banks have been lobbying lawmakers to support the Secure and Fair Enforcement Banking Act, or SAFE, which would enable banks to access the burgeoning multi-billion-dollar cannabis industry. While the sale and use of marijuana is legal in some degree in 47 states and D.C., federal law still prohibits processing, buying, selling, and using marijuana, which remains classified as a Schedule I drug by the Drug Enforcement Agency. Big banks have been hesitant to do business with legitimate cannabis-based companies for fear of running afoul of federal money laundering laws. Financial institutions found that to have violated money laundering laws risk having their assets seized and losing their master account with the Federal Reserve. And this happens quite frequently, too frequently, let's put it that way. That has left dispensaries with few options, including relying on smaller banks and credit unions, which charge higher fees to justify taking on more risk. Dispensaries are then forced to process transactions mostly in cash, making them ripe targets for potential criminals. Since legal sales of marijuana began in 2014, states have collectively generated $8 billion in tax revenue. A bipartisan coalition of House representatives has already voted in favor of the standalone SAFE legislation 5 times, most recently last September. But the Senate wants to tie the bill to other high-priority proposals, including the push for federal legalization of marijuana and expunging criminal records related to cannabis, which requires a much heavier lift to win passage. Both U.S. senators from Colorado and state have seen the financial windfall since it has become the first to legalize recreational marijuana, are urging congressional leaders to fold the SAFE Banking Act into the defense bill. Current law prevents licensing marijuana businesses from assessing bank services and products, such as depository and checking accounts, resulting in businesses operating all in cash. Without federally approved banking services, state licensed cannabis businesses cannot write checks, make or receive electronic payments, utilize a payroll provider, or accept credit or debit cards. So there it is. I always like to, whenever there's cannabis news, we like to bring it to you right away. I was familiar with the SAFE Act. Did not really recall that it was passed in September again. Again, I don't think it should be attached to the to a different bill. It could pass on its own. I don't know how much opposition or why there would be opposition to this at this late date, given that 47 states have totally or partially legalized marijuana. So anyway, that's where we are today. So thanks so much for joining us. Now, again, these marijuana firms, they're fighting the IRS, right? Trying to pay their taxes and all that. Are you fighting the IRS? If you are fighting the IRS, first thing you got to do, get a copy of my book, Deal with Your IRS Problem Today. That'll help you know where to start. Maybe you can solve your own IRS problem. So how do you begin? What's the step one? Get a copy of my book, Deal with Your IRS Problem Today. Go to freeirsbook.com, freeirsbook.com to do that. Before you do that, though, remember to like and subscribe to this page. We need you to like and subscribe. Thanks so much for joining us. Let me see if I can bring up the close. Again, thank you so much for joining us. And we'll see you. Now, remember, tomorrow is Friday. I have Karen Conti on the podcast tomorrow afternoon. About 2 o'clock we go on. Karen Conti's an outstanding attorney here in Illinois, here in Chicago. I think she's a great interview. So join us tomorrow about 2 o'clock for Karen Conti. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you.